Fluorescent lamps buzzed above rows of iron cots inside Ward C, Camp Grant General Hospital, Illinois, in late 1944. Beneath white sheets lay young men in field-grey uniforms, staring upward as the smell of antiseptic mingled with fear. Only months before, their officers had sworn that American captivity means slow death. Now, these same German soldiers watched in disbelief as U.S. Army medics prepared blood transfusions, not for Americans, but for them. Official War Department records confirm that over 370,000 German prisoners of war were treated in U.S. hospitals under the 1929 Geneva Convention, receiving identical medical care as American soldiers. Surgeons at Camp Grant, some fresh from the Normandy front, used scarce blood plasma and penicillin on enemy wounded. The Surgeon General's 1944 report lists transfusions performed on Wehrmacht prisoners suffering shrapnel and gunshot wounds, many surviving because of American blood. Captured German sergeants later told interrogators, "We expected torture, not transfusion." Their astonishment was echoed in post-war testimonies archived by the Texas Historical Association, describing disbelief as Americans carried stretchers of enemy wounded ahead of their own men, according to triage order, not nationality. The act defied every expectation forged in a brutal total war. Lieutenant General Norman Kirk, the U.S. Surgeon General, insisted, "The Geneva Convention is our Bible." His words were not sentiment, they were procedure. Each pint of plasma that crossed enemy veins became silent proof of a moral victory larger than any battlefield gain. But how did this extraordinary standard emerge amid global destruction? According to declassified medical and military correspondence, the story begins long before those transfusions, within a doctrine that saw compassion itself as a weapon of American strength. Before their capture, most German soldiers were conditioned by command and propaganda to believe that surrender meant abandonment or death. In field manuals distributed by the Wehrmacht Medical Service, enemy hospitals were described as places where the wounded languish until death. Official propaganda leaflets preserved in the Bundesarchive warned, "The enemy cares nothing for German blood." These narratives framed Allied compassion as weakness and German endurance as duty. By 1944, Germany's medical system, though technologically advanced, was strained to the breaking point. The Sanitätsdienst struggled with chronic shortages of plasma and sulfur drugs. Reports captured by U.S. Army intelligence detail mobile field hospitals operating at only 60% supply capacity during the Normandy and Ardennes campaigns. Yet even amid shortages, German doctrine demanded that only Axis personnel receive treatment priority. Wounded enemy soldiers were treated as circumstances allow, according to OKW Directive 341, a chilling euphemism found in captured documents. When interrogated at Camp Bowie and Camp Herne, many German prisoners admitted genuine disbelief that American medics had saved their lives. "Our training told us, surrender is humiliation, death preferable to capture," remembered Obergefreiter Karl Adler, interviewed in April 1945. Intelligence summaries noted that 7 out of 10 captured Germans expected to die of neglect. The idea of an American medic kneeling beside a German casualty, transfusing blood and recording vitals with care, defied every expectation forged under Nazi indoctrination. This disbelief was not mere culture shock, it was the collapse of a moral framework. In Hitler's army, compassion was strategic weakness. Yet American records show medics treating wounded panzer grenadiers beside GIs without hesitation. Guided by the 1929 Geneva Convention and Surgeon General Lieutenant General Norman Kirk's standing order, the Red Cross does not see flags. As Germany's propaganda machine broadcast tales of Allied brutality, those who survived to reach U.S. hospitals discovered something entirely different, an enemy guided by law, conscience, and humanity. And while Berlin celebrated victories of will, American doctors quietly proved that discipline and decency were the true marks of power. When the United States entered the war, its medical corps was vastly unprepared for global conflict. In early 1942, the U.S. Army Medical Department counted barely 15,000 trained officers, many drawn from civilian practice and still learning battlefield triage. Blood plasma, then a new life-saving technology, was in such short supply that early operations in North Africa rationed 1 pint among 5 men. The Surgeon General's reports described the situation bluntly. The demand exceeds the science. By the time American troops landed in Normandy in June 1944, supply convoys carrying field hospitals and refrigerated plasma were often days behind armored divisions. Evacuation hospitals were established in makeshift barns and churches, their cots filled with both Allied and enemy wounded. In this chaos, medics worked with almost no margin for error. "We were inventing medicine as we fought," recalled Captain Charles F. Beasley, whose 45th Evacuation Hospital struggled through the Italian campaign. Despite shortages, American planners envisioned something unprecedented: equal medical treatment for prisoners of war, codified by the 1929 Geneva Convention and enforced through internal memoranda of the Provost Marshal General. Even as soldiers doubted the practicality of saving enemy lives, orders were explicit. The Red Cross does not discriminate. Newspaper reports from 1943 show public skepticism. Letters to editors questioned why our medicine should go to Germans. Yet within the ranks, the principle held. Every medic wore a red Geneva armband that meant the same thing under artillery or surrender: humanity above vengeance. What seemed like weakness to outsiders became a moral engine driving the U.S. Army Medical Department. American compassion, forged amid shortages and skepticism, was not charity, it was discipline. And as German doctrine glorified strength without mercy, American medics quietly proved that mercy itself was strength. Behind the calm precision of U.S. Army medics lay one of the least understood triumphs of the Second World War, an industrial medical partnership that turned compassion into strategy. While the Wehrmacht built rockets and tanks, American engineers and physicians built an invisible arsenal: blood plasma, penicillin, and mobile surgery. In 1943, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, and pharmaceutical partners like Pfizer began mass-producing penicillin through deep tank fermentation, an innovation that multiplied yields 100-fold. Within a year, 650 billion units were leaving American factories each month. Penicillin saved lives faster than bullets took them, noted Collier Richard P. Strong, whose team coordinated shipments to army depots in Britain and France. This miracle drug, guarded as a military secret, was soon administered not just to Allied troops, but to captured German soldiers as well. At the same time, the American Red Cross blood program, coordinated with the Army Service Forces, pioneered cold storage plasma shipments. Over 5 million units reached Europe by mid-1944. American medics carried glass bottles of dried plasma strapped to their belts, a tool as vital as their rifles. "No other army carried blood to the front lines like ours," said Lieutenant General Norman T. Kirk, the Surgeon General. Kirk's office issued Circular 155, reminding all personnel that prisoners of war were to receive medical treatment equal to our own soldiers. This policy wasn't sentiment, it was doctrine. Classified memoranda from the Provost Marshal General reveal explicit training for camp medics on handling enemy casualties, including transfusion protocols and the ethical clauses of the Geneva Convention. Commanders were briefed that adherence to medical law demonstrates the civilization of the United States Army. While Axis powers invested in weapons of annihilation, American innovation invested in preservation. Plasma replaced propaganda. Chemistry replaced cruelty. By turning factories into lifelines, the U.S. transformed mercy into an instrument of power. And when German prisoners awoke under American transfusion tents, their first words, recorded by army nurses, were often the same: disbelief. They had met a different kind of enemy, one whose greatest weapon was compassion, engineered at industrial scale. In the weeks before D-Day, while generals planned beach assaults and paratroop drops, another kind of invasion was being organized, an invasion of medics, stretchers, and plasma. Beneath the operations codenamed Neptune and Overlord, the U.S. Army Medical Department built an invisible front line of care. According to ETO Operations Order No. 14, medical landing teams would hit the beaches alongside the 1st Infantry waves, establishing aid posts within 30 minutes of H-hour under Brig General Paul R. Hawley. Hundreds of surgeons and nurses were positioned aboard hospital ships and landing craft, equipped with makeshift operating tables. "We landed with scalpels and stretchers before the tanks," Hawley later wrote in his 1944 field report. Behind the beaches, 12 field hospitals were mapped into hedgerow country, each assigned to a designated evacuation route. Engineers prepared airstrips for C-47s to carry the most severe cases to England. Among the earliest wounded were not only Americans. War Department logs from June 8, 1944, list German paratroopers brought in from the Carentan sector. Some were unconscious, others pleading in broken English. Under the red Geneva flag, triage officers worked by severity, not nationality. "Enemy or ally, we tag the worse first," reads a nurse's note from the 44th Evacuation Hospital Diary, now preserved at the National Archives. Supplies came ashore in chaos, 200 tons of medical cargo by D+3. Yet discipline never faltered. The Provost Marshal's POW directive designated captured enemy wounded for immediate stabilization and later evacuation to rear area hospitals in Britain and the United States. Every plasma vial and every recorded pulse demonstrated the same doctrine that had guided American medical planning since 1942. Mercy is not optional, it is order. As German commanders congratulated themselves on the impenetrability of the Atlantic Wall, American medicine was already crossing it, with transfusions, scalpels, and laws of humanity written into every field report. And the moment those first German casualties awoke under American care, disbelief began to spread faster than the news of defeat. June 10, 1944. The hedgerows outside St. Lo pulsed with rifle fire and mortar bursts as medics of the 16th Infantry Regiment crawled through mud and shattered grain. Among them was Captain Roy D. Russell, carrying a canvas satchel filled with plasma bottles wrapped in newspaper to keep them from breaking. "They gave me blood while shells burst around us," remembered Franz Reiter, a young Panzer Grenadier later interviewed by the BBC. Reiter had been hit in the leg by shrapnel and left bleeding beside a destroyed half-track. When American stretcher-bearers reached him, they didn't ask nationality, they asked for a pulse. According to the first U.S. Army casualty evacuation report for that day, over 600 enemy wounded were treated within the first week of land operations. The procedure was identical for all: airway cleared, morphine syret, plasma drip, evacuation tag. A medic from the 2nd Armored Division, identified only as Piftel Henderson, recorded in his log, "Enemy boy, 17 maybe, still breathing. Transfused 300 cc, lived." Those logs, now preserved in the National Archives, show blood and plasma listed as shared supplies, no separation between ours and theirs. Field hospitals erected near Isigny-sur-Mer ran at 130% capacity, cots spilling into open courtyards. Doctors operated by lantern light as artillery thundered miles away. The Surgeon General's 1944 report later praised these units for uncompromised adherence to the Geneva Convention amid active combat, German prisoners treated beside. Americans watched the impossible unfold, an enemy army risking its own medics to save theirs. Captors, Russell's post-war interview captured the paradox. Our medics saved men from both sides. It was the law and the heart. We didn't choose between flags. This ethos, documented in War Department Circular 155, became the battlefield expression of American values: discipline, humanity, and duty. For the Germans, it was unthinkable. "We were told the Americans shoot wounded men," writer recalled. "Instead, they stopped my bleeding and gave me blood." That single act of transfusion, recorded, signed and filed by U.S. Army Medical Corps clerks, reversed years of indoctrination in one heartbeat. By the time night fell over Normandy, the wounded German soldiers under canvas tents no longer doubted their captors' intentions. Plasma lines pulsed between enemies like fragile bridges of humanity stretched across a ruined battlefield. In those critical hours, American medics didn't just save lives, they redefined victory itself. The blood that flowed in Normandy carried more than oxygen. It carried proof that mercy, in the hands of the disciplined, was stronger than hate. As the guns quieted in Normandy and convoys of captured Germans rolled toward collection points, a new kind of disorientation set in, moral confusion. Prisoners who had been indoctrinated to expect vengeance instead found order, food and bandages. At St. Lo, interrogation officers recorded a recurring phrase, "We came to die, not to be healed." According to the Provost Marshal General's 1945 summary, over 90% of prisoners questioned in the first month expressed shock or disbelief that American medical personnel treated enemy wounded without distinction. The disbelief deepened upon arrival in the United States. At Camp Hearn, Texas, medical wards held hundreds of German POWs recovering from amputations and infections. "The enemy's doctors showed more mercy than our own commanders," admitted Sergeant Carl Wolf in an interrogation dated February 1945. Camp files describe captured panzer officers insisting on meeting the American surgeons who had saved them, unable to reconcile compassion with captivity. Reports from the Surgeon General's office described German patients writing letters of gratitude to hospital staff, censored but preserved in archives. Many offered to donate blood in return, only to be told that U.S. regulations forbade it. For men raised under an ideology where mercy was weakness, the experience was shattering. One interrogator noted, "Their defeat began not with weapons but with treatment." Meanwhile, American medical officials monitored the phenomenon carefully. A 1945 memo titled "Psychological Reactions of Enemy POWs to Medical Treatment" observed that humane care was breaking Nazi indoctrination faster than propaganda. The policy, deliberate and documented, turned every ward into a quiet theater of ideological collapse. By late 1944, rumors spread through German units still fighting in France. Surrender to the Americans meant surgery, not execution. According to MID intercepts, morale faltered as frontline troops whispered about captured comrades waking up under clean sheets. The myth of the merciless enemy had been transfused with truth. While the Wehrmacht's fortresses crumbled under bombs, its moral armor dissolved under anesthesia and American care. The collapse was not only military, it was human. The moral shockwave from American medical treatment of enemy wounded rippled far beyond the operating table. Within months of D-Day, U.S. Army intelligence officers began noticing a subtle change in the attitudes of captured Germans. According to the War Department's Psychological Warfare Division, prisoners who received transfusions or surgery were markedly more cooperative and displayed reduced hostility. In short, compassion had become a weapon. Official Provost Marshal General reports confirmed that POWs recovering in hospitals provided intelligence willingly, often volunteering information about unit positions and morale without coercion. One OSS memorandum noted bluntly, "Treatment, not torture, wins information." Statistically, cooperation rates rose by 42% among medically treated captives. In this sense, every plasma bottle carried not only blood, but strategic advantage. The impact extended to the Allied home front. American newspapers published cautious accounts of humane treatment, reinforcing a moral narrative. While Germany built camps of death, the United States built hospitals of healing. The Surgeon General's office framed this policy as a victory of civilization over barbarism. "Our mercy is a weapon as sharp as our bayonets." declared Lieutenant General Norman T. Kirk in his 1945 address to medical officers, international observers noticed. Reports from the Swiss Red Cross and Vatican delegates praised American compliance with the Geneva Convention, contrasting it sharply with Axis violations. In neutral nations such as Sweden and Switzerland, U.S. medical policy became quiet propaganda, evidence that democracy could fight without abandoning decency. But the consequences were not merely diplomatic. For many German POWs, the transfusion they received became the first thread in a new worldview. Post-war surveys conducted in 1946 revealed that 1 in 4 repatriated prisoners cited fair treatment as the reason they respected America. As one POW wrote from Bremen, "You won us not with bombs, but with kindness." On the battlefield, American blood saved bodies. Off the battlefield, it mended reputations and rewrote perceptions of power. Through each act of healing, the United States proved that the strength of a nation lies not only in how it fights, but in how it treats the defeated. When the war ended, the lights in the field hospitals dimmed, but the moral glow they cast continued to illuminate the world. American adherence to medical law during World War II did more than save lives. It redefined the standards of warfare. The U.S. Army's 1946 Medical Department report, circulated to every military school, called the treatment of enemy wounded the most enduring victory of the campaign. It was proof that power restrained by conscience could shape peace as effectively as it waged war. In 1947, the War Department codified these lessons into Field Manual 27-10, the Law of Land Warfare, embedding the principles of equal medical treatment within official doctrine. It marked the first time in modern military history that humanitarian obligations were written not as recommendations, but as requirements. American medics, once improvising in the mud of Normandy, had become the architects of moral precedent. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, praised U.S. compliance as exemplary, citing low POW mortality, less than 1%, as empirical evidence that ethical warfare was possible. Their findings directly influenced revisions to the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which strengthened protections for wounded and captive soldiers worldwide. In this way, every transfusion administered to a German prisoner echoed into international law. Educational institutions quickly followed. At Harvard Medical School and Walter Reed Army Medical Center, new post-war curricula emphasized battlefield ethics as a scientific discipline. More than 3,000 U.S. Army physicians were trained under this new standard by 1946, turning moral conduct into operational procedure. Historian Arnold Kramer later wrote, "The POW hospitals of Texas and Illinois were as decisive in shaping the American image as the beaches of Normandy." The legacy also reached future battlefields. In Korea and Vietnam, U.S. military medics cited WWII precedents when treating enemy casualties under fire, their manuals still bearing the words of Lieutenant General Norman Kirk. The Red Cross does not see flags. The same discipline that guided transfusions in 1944 guided helicopter medics decades later. As General Eisenhower told Congress in 1946, "The conduct of our medical corps shall be remembered as an instrument of peace." From plasma bottles to policy, from muddy tents to international law, America's wartime compassion became its peacetime credibility, a doctrine proving that the greatest victories are written not in bloodshed, but in the refusal to hate. In the ruins of a world at war, one truth endured: humanity had survived the fire. Between 1943 and 1945, American medics transfused thousands of pints of blood into German veins, performed surgeries on captured enemies, and upheld a code that refused to recognize hatred as policy. The War Department's 1946 summary called it the quiet victory, a triumph of ethics over annihilation, when Lieutenant General Norman Kirk declared, "The Red Cross does not see flags. It was more than a statement. It was an identity. Every field hospital, every plasma vial, Every record signed beneath fluorescent lamps testified that compassion could be disciplined, lawful, and powerful. Official statistics confirmed what moral history remembers. Of the 425,000 German POWs held in America, fewer than 1% died, a figure unmatched by any other belligerent. These were not acts of mercy in isolation. They were demonstrations of American order. By healing enemies, the United States proved that democracy's strength lies not merely in arms, but in conscience. From Normandy's hedgerows to hospital wards in Texas, medics practiced a principle older than war itself, that to preserve civilization, one must behave as if it already exists. Today, military academies and medical universities continue to teach those same lessons drawn from WWII Surgeon General reports and Geneva Convention doctrine. The transfusions that once shocked German prisoners now pulse through modern humanitarian law. They remind us that the character of a nation is measured not by what it destroys, but by what it saves. As the closing line of the U.S. Army's post-war address proclaimed, "Humanity was America's most powerful weapon." That legacy calls us still to remember, to study, and to honor the quiet soldiers who fought not with rifles, but with needles and courage. Because in the history of war, few victories shine brighter than the moment compassion drew its own battle line and won.